the time. Okay, I am Julie Love. I run the McLean School Nurse Liaison Project, which offers education like these presentations and others to come that I'm going to start making new ones. I offer resources like all those slides that we're showing before. Anything in the presentation that has a little number by it, same number system. So you just jot down those numbers and you can request them by number. And I offer consultations, so people can call me if they've got any issues about any of their students or stuff going on in school, or they just heard something on the news and they want to understand how it makes sense. I'm preferably psych related. I have been known to answer just about anything, but I am primarily here to talk about mental and behavioral health among students. So I do offer contact hours and PDPs for the presentations that I have been able to have vetted for that. So as I come up with new presentations, they might not offer CEUs because that's a whole additional chunk of time and work, and I'd rather just get the information out. But this one is one that does offer CEUs. So I do have to disclose my conflicts of interest and my commercial bias. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose because I get no kickbacks from any drug companies out there. So on the evaluation, you will be asked, did I tell you that I have no conflicts? Did I tell you that my program has no conflicts? And the last question is there any bias? And they mean commercial bias. So if you say yes, that there's commercial bias, you gotta tell me what it was, because my grant that this program is supported by is ending next spring. I'd love to know if there's any untapped wells of money out there that I could actually be charging for whatever I'm saying. So, and of course, this is more for in real life that people can get up and wander around the room if they want to listen. But of course, you could do that now and no one would even know. So enjoy the freedom that webinars give you. So, proceeding to the concept of somatic disorders. Now, what do we even mean by somatic disorders? Okay, in the DSM-5 came out in 2013, and the DSM is Diagnostic and Statistics Manual, and it is psychiatry's book of diagnoses, and it's got all of the criteria and what symptoms you have to be able to attest to seeing to be able to diagnose someone with one. And in the new revision, some things changed drastically. Some diagnoses went away, new ones came in, and so on. In the somatic disorders corner of it, didn't change that much. The names changed, but pretty much everything else stayed the same. The names got way more boring. So the primary one that we used to call somatoform is now called illness anxiety disorder. And it's basically, or no, that's not somatoform. This one we used to call hypochondriasis, hypochondriacs. Illness anxiety disorder is a person who doesn't really have an illness, doesn't have anything other than vague symptoms, but every vague symptom they have, they're terrified might be a sign that they're about to get sick, or they have no symptoms and they're still terrified that they are about to get sick. So it's basically a person with a lot of anxiety and way too much time on Google to look up whatever their body feels. Okay, somatic symptom disorder, that's the one that we used to call somatoform. This is where a person primarily has a psychiatric issue. Whatever's going on is psych in nature, but the way it expresses itself in their behavior and body is through physical symptoms. Okay, and that's what we're mostly going to be talking about today. Now, conversion disorder is a special kind of somatic symptom disorder. So it's the same exact thing, except the symptoms that are being expressed are neuromuscular symptoms, such as pseudoseizures. And we will spend a good chunk of time talking about pseudoseizures towards the end. Then we have psychological factors affecting other medical conditions, which is very, very important for us to include in here. For the psych geeks, the old DSM had 5 axes of different aspects of the person that you're supposed to make sure that you are looking at mental illness and social situation and medical situation and overall functioning and things like that. They got rid of the 5 axes, which I miss because I really liked emphasizing to people the axis 3 for medical condition you need to pay attention to. And so instead, they just tucked it over here in this corner where I worry it'll be neglected when people are just diagnosing someone with depression or anxiety. But you need to pay attention to this, because if a person has depression and they're suicidal and they're also an insulin dependent diabetic, that's scary, because they could kill themselves very easily with an overdose of insulin. Or if you've got a person who's got anxiety and they also have asthma, that's a really common comorbidity, and it is a train wreck, because when they get short of breath, they get anxious, which makes them short of breath, which makes them more anxious, and it can become a self-stoking cycle that exacerbates both disorders. If you've got someone who has an eating disorder and also diabetes, they might be messing with their insulin in order to adjust their nutritional intake, so on. So we really want to be paying attention to the medical conditions as well as the psychological conditions. Now, factitious disorder is a person who does not have naturally occurring symptoms, and they are actively taking steps to create these symptoms. Or they have a naturally occurring symptom, but they're taking steps to exacerbate or prolong the symptoms. So this would be someone who is taking a lot of laxatives and then going to the doctor all the time for diarrhea, or someone who has an injury and they keep doing stuff to keep it from healing or to cause infections so that the injury continues. If they are doing it for themselves, it's called factitious disorder. It is also something that we see in a situation where someone has care of another person, where they do it to the other person and make the other person be sick. This is what we used to call it out in chat now. You can do it, you can do it. Someone can type, no one knows how to spell it. That's why you're not typing it in. It's Munchausen syndrome. And we called it, yeah, see, someone's got, ooh, and you even spelled it right. Yeah. Okay, maybe autocorrect helped, who knows? And when it's for someone in your care, it's called Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And then there's always in every corner of Psychland, we want to have someplace for this person clearly has a treatable disorder in this realm, but they don't quite qualify for any of the ones that we've got listed here. And so we've got the not otherwise specified. It used to be NOS, and now we just call it other specified and unspecified. So anything that doesn't really fit. So where exactly do somatic disorders come from? Well, it's news for a lot of people, but the brain and the body, they're connected to each other. Did you know that? And it turns out they actually influence each other. Who'd have thunk it, you know? I mean, this is something that we sort of get and we sort of accept and we sort of believe in, kind of when it's convenient and or fits our underlying philosophical attitudes. So like when you make it look all sciencey like this, we're on board, you know. And now all the nurses in the audience are having flashbacks on trying to memorize this damn thing for nursing school, aren't you? Part of why we're kind of okay with, oh yeah, the brain is affecting all the organs in the body is because we're talking about the bottom part of the brain, you know, the brain stem. That doesn't really count as the brain, right? That's really more body. We're not talking about the thinking bits. We're talking about just the heart rate bits, right? Except more and more, we are also recognizing how the brain and the emotions and other parts of the brain up there can also affect the body. You know, that stress can cause organ damage basically throughout the whole body, you know. And up here's a nice thing about how chronic pain and anxiety and fatigue all circle around each other and cause each other. And you do not want to forget, there's a lot of disorders that for a long time, like fibromyalgia, lupus, things like that, doctors would just decide were all in your head and not worth treating, which is the real problem, because people would decide that even if the mind and the body are connected and influencing each other, once you find out where something originates, what that tells you is whether you need to treat it or whether you need to just tell them to suck up and deal because it's not real. We are starting to also recognize that the mind can influence the body in a healthy way as well. Oh, someone was asking, oh, that reminds me, I need to specify about questions. Someone was saying, where's the typing spot? On the bottom of your screen, there should be various things to select. And on the far right-hand side, there might be 3 dots with more. Chat is where you will be able to type things that I might see during. If you want to ask a question during the presentation and have any hope of me maybe being able to answer it, or if I ask something and you're trying to call out an answer, put it in chat. If you have a question for the end, there's another thing that says Q&A. Those I will not read until the end because I can't have all the windows open at once. And it's also kind of hard to teach and read at the same time. So chat is enough of a challenge for me. So if you got anything to comment on or ask about during, put it in chat. If you got a question that can wait to the end, you can go ahead and write in Q&A whenever you think of it. You don't have to wait to the end to write them there. If you want me to try and answer it during, put question in all caps on the chat one, and that might draw my eye better. Okay, so thank you. Okay, so getting back to, we're recognizing that the body can also influence, or the brain can also influence the body for good, you know, and we're promoting things like yoga and meditation and recognizing the influence of diet on your mood. And some people, you know, like to do the pincushion thing of acupuncture. But when you look at a quote like this, people still in our country, in the West, tend to look at this and say, that's you mean that like metaphorically, right? You're not actually saying that the way you think about something is going to change any actual chemicals in your body, do you? You know, even though we recognize that acupuncture works, and acupuncture is based on some of the sciences that look like this, which in the Western world, we tend to say is not science. It's more like cartoons or myths or mystical ideas. You know, the acupuncture is underlaid by this idea of the chakras, which are nodes along your midline that are the processing for this mystical energy, chi, that flows through your whole body, and that illness and disease and dis-ease come from blockages in the chakras that interfere with the free flow of the energy. And the blockages can come from things like shame or lying to yourself. People will be like, seriously? So feeling guilty is going to like make your appendix get inflamed? I don't think so. Even though we recognize that acupuncture that grew out of this philosophy is highly effective. And even though if we draw it like this, people are like, oh yeah, I totally get that. Because we all can relate to days when you're functional but kind of disjointed, and the days when you're a total hot mess, and the days when everything's humming along beautifully. And what is this thing that is humming along beautifully? Oh, I don't know, just, you know, everything, you know, my energy. But in general, in the West, we're really only comfortable if we're talking about emotions and tummies. That's really the only pipeline of connection that we will validate and legitimize the idea that, oh yeah, you get stomach aches if you're anxious. And that's how I know it's not a real stomach ache, which again is this idea that if it's from anxiety, it's somehow not real. I want to point out these arrows on the sides, they're on all 3 sides and they go in both directions. They're not just saying that the psychology can give you the stomach ache. Also, the stomach ache can affect your mood. You know, the environment and the biology can actively change things like your gut motility and the chemistry in your body. But again, it's a real hard sell in the West, because in the West, we're used to thinking of it like this. You know, the kid says they don't feel good, but I take their temperature, no fever, I knew it. It's acute appendicitis. And what that means is you're not sick. Probably you're lying, you're faking it. You're trying to get out of school when there's no reason to miss school because you're fine. You just want me to think you're sick. No, this is not the way it works. Just because something might have started in the brain does not mean that what's going on elsewhere in the body is not real. Okay, it is real. A kid who has a stomach ache caused by anxiety has a real stomach ache. And the teacher who says, oh yeah, he gets a stomach ache every day at 10, so I know it's not a real stomach ache. I just really want that teacher to come and ask me for some Tylenol for their stress headache so that I could tell them, oh, but it's a stress headache, so your head doesn't actually hurt right now, you know. Obviously, a stress headache hurts. And a stress stomach ache is a real stomach ache. You got a stomach, it aches. Only prerequisites necessary for a real stomach ache. And if you doubt how profound this influence can be, there's a really amazing story about a young boy named, named James. He lived in Victorian England, and he was the youngest of, I think, 5. And his older brother, David, I'm pretty sure was his name, was the favorite. Everybody loved David, which made it all the sadder when at age 14, David was killed in a tragic skating accident, the kind of accidents they had in Victorian England, I guess. And James's mother fell into a deep, deep depression. And James remembers vividly when he's 6, his mother being so depressed over losing David, and everyone knowing that just the heart had gone out of the family. He vividly recalls at one point he was in another room and his mom called out, "Is that you?" And his automatic response was, "No, Mom, it's just me." Because he knew that who she really wanted was David. Now, people take their comfort wherever they can, and where his mom ultimately found her path through grief was by deciding and saying out loud frequently to her 6-year-old son that, well, at least this way, David would never grow up, get married, and move out and abandon her the way men always do. Because that's what sons do. They grow up and they leave. And this way, instead, he will always be her precious little boy in her heart. And she'll never have to see him go away like that. At which point, James, 6-year-old James, stopped growing. He never got taller than like 5'2". And while he did, ultimately go on and get married, it was kind of an open secret throughout society that the marriage was never consummated. So it's possible that he never even went through puberty. It's not like he was deciding, I'm going to fake being small and staying a little boy so mommy will love me. There was nothing conscious about it, and it sure as heck wasn't fake. It was a real physical phenomenon that happened. And so you gotta just really appreciate the profound influence that the brain has on the body and vice versa, and stop using the term psychosomatic as a synonym for fake, okay? You might wonder, why do we know about this kid in Victorian England? It's because he did chronologically grow up, and he, got married, and he had a career. He was a writer. He was J.M. Barrie. He wrote Peter Pan, about the boy who never grows up. So, oops, went too far. If you would like to raise your child to be a very somatic child and to be the most frequent of frequent flyers in the nurse's office, this is how to do it, okay? Step 1, the moment you decide or discover, it might just be your own decision, that whatever the kid's complaining about is caused by a psychological state or an emotion, immediately tell them that it's not real, they're lying, it's faking, and tell them to get on with life and give them no sympathy or support, okay? When they are really sick, totally pour it on. Be nurturing and kind and attentive. Take really good care of them, It works really well if that's pretty much the only time that you pay attention to them and are really attentive. But while you're lavishing all this attention on them, make sure that it is very clear that it's the illness that you're paying attention to. Have most of the contact you're having with them be about asking how they're feeling, or giving them treatment or medicine, or taking them to doctors. Make that really the center of the universe, okay? And then, of course, if they get better, the moment they get better, it's back to school for you. Immediately they have to go back to full function, all responsibilities, plus all their back homework, and whatever extra attention they were getting, that's gone. Withdraw the attention immediately. The more jarring, the better, okay? Through all of this, everyone in the family, everyone always has roles, okay? In your family, you can think when you're growing up kind of what your role was, what your siblings' roles were, and so on. In a family with a somatic child, it's really easy. You got these prepackaged roles where the kid is the sick kid and the parent is the caregiver. So you make sure that everybody has their roles clearly defined through the lens of this injury or illness so that everybody knows where they belong. You gotta not underestimate how alluring that kind of familiarity is. Even if your role sucks, the fact that it is yours and it is familiar makes it a very, very strong draw, okay? Now all of this could take years, so if you want to do it in a hurry, you take whatever really big problem you or your family was having, and the moment the kid gets sick or injured, it's back burner, no one's worried about it anymore. You know, so like, hey, mom and dad, they were fighting all the time. They were on the verge of divorce and it was awful, but you know, I broke my leg and now they're not fighting. They both came to the hospital. They're working together to figure out who drives me to school. Everything is solved. If I can just keep this leg broken indefinitely, we're fine. So now, if you do all that, what you end up with is a kid that, first of all, believes everything that you've taught them, you know, because that's what kids tend to do. So if you believe that it's not a real sickness, unless it's a medical sickness, they will also believe this. And so they will also believe that it must be medical to be legitimate. Now, I've been describing it in a very, you know, exaggerated way. You want to recognize this can happen to varying degrees and does happen to all of us in varying degrees. I mean, we all have a little bit of this going. In my case, here's what happened in my family. I'm the youngest of three, okay? My oldest brother, he had really bad asthma and allergies, so he was like wheezing and sick all the time from like birth on, okay? Then my second brother was born, and he screamed nonstop for like 18 months until they diagnosed the problem with his eye and removed that eye, and then he wasn't in pain all the time, so he stopped screaming, but he did keep bumping into anything on his right-hand side because blind on that side for the rest of his life. And so by the time I came along a few years later, my defined, prescribed, assigned, insisted upon role was that I was going to be the healthy one, damn it. And so from pretty much from day one, if I ever said, hey mom, I don't feel that good, her automatic response before even coming to check me out would be, oh, you're probably just doing this for attention like your brothers get. And when you're a kid, you don't actually know. And I'm like, well, am I? Maybe could I, how much pain is the right amount, is real? I don't know. And so if I managed to be staying home sick, I always felt kind of bad about it. Not just like sick bad, but I felt guilty. I felt like I was cheating, like it was illegitimate because I wasn't really sure. So the result was I was a kid who loved it, absolutely loved it when I got strep. Or not strep, sorry, when I got croup. You know what croup is, right? Croup is that one with that really barking seal bark cough, okay? Sounds like your lungs are gonna fly across the room any second now. It's kind of miserable to have, but I could finally just relax and be sick and accept whatever sympathy and support I got guilt-free because I knew I was sick. My mom knew I was sick. Heck, the neighbors knew I was sick. And so I could relax and it was legitimate. So you want to recognize it can happen to all different levels to different people, okay? But if it happens strongly enough, you also end up with a kid who has a really hard time with emotional regulation because it's hard to regulate something that you don't even recognize, and it's really hard to recognize your emotions if you ignore them all the time. And if all your life you're told anything that's an emotional sensation in your body is fake, don't listen to it, it's not real. Your body is how you feel emotions when you're young. You don't have the words to feel them, to recognize them as emotions. You know, a 3-year-old doesn't know that he's having anxiety. He just knows he gets a tummy ache when mommy and daddy fight too much. And so if you're constantly, yeah, that's not real, yeah, that's not real, and you're turning a deaf ear to your body's desperate efforts to let you know what your emotions are, you pretty much don't know what your emotions are. And then you really can't regulate them very much. You also end up really wanting a kid who really wants to be sick, or if they are sick, they kind of want to keep it as long as they can because that's the way that they get affection. That's the way they get attention. And the moment it ends, they're going to be abandoned and they're going to have lots of stress and responsibility. And then basically it comes down to the world is better when I'm sick. and the world sucks more when I'm healthy. Therefore, I would rather be sick. Plus, it's stable, it's familiar. Everybody has their role, and this is my role. So being healthy is just kind of doesn't fit. It's not part of the script. Okay, they just don't know how to be a healthy person. And it's not just them. They kind of feel like no one, I mean, they look at other families where there isn't a chronically ill child, and they're like, what does your mom do all day? I don't understand how that even works, okay? Underneath all of it, in addition to that underlying feeling that life is better when I am sick than when I am healthy, you also want to recognize that an abiding core belief growing in this child is that I don't really matter. I'm not worthy of time, attention, positive regard, anything. But my illness is, or my injury is. I should not bother you, but my illness, that's worth taking up your time. And we would see this on one of the units I worked on. We'd have mostly girls. We'd have girls who were self-injurious, so they'd, have lots of cuts and so on. And so they'd be coming for a new Band-Aid, need a new Band-Aid. Oh, it got wet. Oh, it's coming up a little on the corner, whatever. Any excuse for a new Band-Aid, like 5-10 times a day, they're coming for a new Band-Aid. Is it attention-seeking behavior? Heck yeah, it's attention-seeking behavior. But we also recognize that underneath that is them saying basically, I'm not really worthy of attention. You shouldn't pay attention to me now. But my injury, you're a nurse, you're supposed to change bandages. My injury is worthy of your attention. It can take up your time, I can't. So I'm gonna bring my injury to you to take up your time, and I'll just be kind of attention adjacent. I'll just bask in the reflected glow that my injury deserves, but I don't. So what we did for these kids, in case you're curious, is we set up a phlebotomy chair, one of those chairs that has the thing under the arm with all the supply, supply cabinet under the arm. And we put all the first aid supplies in there. And whenever the kid came in for a new Band-Aid, we'd be like, oh yeah, it's right over there, help yourself. And they get started, we wrap up what we're doing, and then we turn and we talk to the kid. Hey, how you doing? How you feeling? Hey, what'd you do in class today? Hey, you have a pass this weekend? Any kind of conversation that is not about the injury at all, but just about the kid, to really demonstrate to them that they are the one we want to spend time with, not their injury. And of course, being nurses with like preternatural levels of peripheral vision, we could then write a very detailed note about that injury and how it's healing, because we could see it fine while they're changing their own Band-Aid. Now, you might look at the last couple slides and think, finally, we've got something we can blame the family for, right? This is what we've been looking for all along. Every time you got a problem kid, you're like, oh, why'd the family make them this way? No, doesn't work that way. Not even for this one, even with what I said in the last two slides, because you have to recognize every single mental illness on the planet comes from a person having a predisposing factors or vulnerabilities that are built into them, and interaction with the environment that they're in. And the environment that they're in includes people in addition to the family. Okay, so when it comes to somatic disorders, there's some very interesting hardwiring that is right there, okay? For one thing, they are very hypersensitive to sensation, especially visceral sensation. They can feel things going on inside their body that other people don't even feel. And we all recognize that people have different thresholds, that people's nerves are different and work differently. If you're ever checking for reflexes, you write down, 0 if they're floppy, +1 up to +5 to show that that nerve reacts differently for different people. And if we were doing this live, what I'd do is I'd hop up on the chair and show you that I've got patellar reflex that looks entirely fake, because my leg really flies if I get the patellar reflex just right. That's the hitting you just below the knee thing that they do with the little rubber hammer. I've nearly taken the face off of any number of doctors, and then they think that I'm just messing with them. But no, I'm like a 5+ on that one. So we get that people's nerves are wired differently. And the nerves in the brain that conduct your emotions can be wired differently too. So you frequently have a person who's very emotionally reactive. They very quickly and extremely have an emotional reaction to whatever stimulus happens. And we all know some people that go from 0 to 60 really fast, and other people who will like stare at something for a very long time before they go, oh, I like that, you know, and where they're just really slow to warm up or slow to, you know, whatever. There's also something that we don't really have a good word for. Sometimes we say enmeshment, but I don't really like that one. So I decided to call it emotional contagion. This is where people can sense the emotions of the people around them. And a lot of us in caring professions have this and do this. I mean, raise your hand if you're someone where if you walk into a room with people in it, remember when we used to walk into rooms and there were people in them? Picture this. Okay, you walk into a room, there's a bunch of people in it, and you can tell that someone's angry. You know that there is anger in this room before you even talk to anyone. Yeah, out of, we got 94 people here, and we got almost 20 people saying, yep, I can totally do that. You know, that being around an emotion, even without the emotion being expressed, you can feel it. And if you've got that, it's like a reflex. It's something in your wiring. And it's really important to identify that and not just kind of, yeah, well, just ignore it to someone, but tell them, hey, this is something you've got. And it is good for you to learn how to manage it. It's good for you to be able to recognize what emotions are mine and what emotions are someone else's that I'm feeling. Because otherwise, you're at the whim of everyone else's emotions, you know? You go and talk to a friend and they want to just get off their chest how upset they are. And now they feel better, but man, my day's trash because now I'm going to be sad all day because of what they told me. So being able to develop that sense of my emotions versus other people's emotions that I'm highly tuned to. Now, if you've got someone who's got all this going on, it is not surprising that they feel a lot of physical sensations all the time because their emotions are going all over the place and the hypersensitivity and all the nerves are wired up to where they are feeling physical sensations in as much of a storm as their emotionals as well. And then you put them into an environment that says, yeah, those physical things, those are fake. That's not real. You should ignore that. You're faking it. You're somehow bad to even say that you have that stomach ache because you're lying to me. And it's attitudes that are being fostered. It might be from the family. If it's from the family, it's probably because that's what they were told to and what their parents were told and parents before them. I mean, this is very, very, very common. And it's very common in different cultures. It varies as well. There's also not just the attitude that if it's an emotional thing, it's not real. There's also the idea that if it's an emotional or psychological problem, it's something to be hidden and ashamed of, whereas a medical problem is something that you don't have to be ashamed of, and therefore that affects how they feel things as well. There's also, you can have things that happen that no one is actually expecting, you know, the parents on the verge of divorce who suddenly pull it together and are working compatibly with each other to coordinate their child's chemotherapy in the face of a cancer diagnosis are not trying to raise their child to be somatic, okay? They're just trying to be human beings in a stressful situation. And then there's the fact that it's not just the family that can have an influence. You can have a family that totally gets all this, but you got some other people in the community or a teacher. You have one teacher at a young age that says, well, that's not a real stomach ache. No, you can't go to the nurse. You're faking it. Sit down and just suck up and deal. Maybe not in those words, but gives that kind of tone of, you can't go to the nurse because you're lying to me. That will also strongly influence how the kid processes all this as they grow up. So, of course, what we'd like to be doing is reducing this, not increasing it. So all the snark aside about how to increase it, here's how to try to reduce it in all of our children. Because as I said, this can happen to varying degrees to everybody because it is very much, while the wiring might be there, the attitudes are there for everybody, okay? So we want to start by really helping kids learn how to process their emotions. And I do have the whole presentation on developing coping skills, which I think I will probably do one more time in June, that is about recognizing what your emotions are, starting with recognizing the physical sensations that are connected to emotions and validating that. Get really used to when you see a kid having any kind of experience, saying, wow, it looks like you're really feeling, and name the emotion so that they can start recognizing that, oh, this sensation I'm having has a name and it's real, not oh, it looks like you're just anxious, go away. But, oh, it looks like you're really anxious about something as well, okay? And then that will help them begin to learn how to manage those emotions. And as I said, there's another whole presentation, so I'm not going to unpack that too thoroughly. We also want to notice, how do we treat the kids when they are hurt or sick? And how do we treat healthy kids? You know, quite aside from kids coming with complaints or not coming with complaints, if you're always healthy and always ignored, you start to kind of learn that, yeah, life does look like it gets better in some ways when you're sick. So we'd really like to be offering positive regard and attention to healthy kids and sick kids, and not have it be, ooh, the really juicy attention goes just to the ones who have problems, okay? When you do have someone who has an illness or injury, we want to make sure that they don't end up feeling like the only thing worthwhile about them, the only reason why you're giving them the time of day is because of their illness or injury. So you don't want to focus just on that. You want to try to focus on other aspects of the kid as well, so that they do not, if we pigeonhole them, they pigeonhole themselves. So we don't want them to have their identity be locked into what they're getting treatment for, but really foster and encourage them to have an identity that includes many different aspects of them. And of course, we need to teach the family and the school community and anyone we can meet to do the same to help support this. So starting with helping them learn how to interpret their physical symptoms, okay? Again, we want to not have the, oh, it's just anxiety, so there's nothing wrong with you, go back to class. Instead, if a kid's got a stomach ache every day at 10, you want to say, hey, your stomach's trying to tell you something. We need to be detectives to figure out, what is it trying to tell you? It might be telling you that you never eat breakfast and you're hungry. It might be telling you that you need to go to the bathroom about the same time every morning. It might be telling you that you really don't like math. It might be telling you that you're really worried about some friends in that class. It might be telling you that you're worried about something going on at home and you just can't take it anymore after a couple hours of not being able to see what the status is of that problem. It might be telling you that you do have breakfast every morning and you really shouldn't have dairy products. Could be anything. It could be medical, it could be emotional, it could be both. And we want to normalize the idea that what you might find out is insight into your emotions as well. And that this is a natural part of the process. It's not you lying. One thing that some schools do, I'll show it on the next page, is have a blank body. And one school is like, hey, we'll trace an actual kid and have like a life-size blank body, and anyone can write on it where they feel different things, okay? We want to be trying to find out what the true cause of the discomfort is so that we can address it. Not so that we can say, oh, well, it's emotional, so I don't have to do anything, go back to class. Oh, it's medical, okay, now I'll do something. But to have it be, yes, you want to feel better. The key to feeling better is figuring out what is causing the bad feeling in the first place. Whatever it is, we want to deal with it, okay? And also, just because you see a pattern there and you think that it may well be due to this, do not forget that there might be lots of medical things out there as well that could also fit to a schedule like that. Do not forget the suffering of people with lupus and fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome, of spending years being told, yeah, there's nothing wrong with you, it's all in your head. Or if people are nice, telling them that they should get some psychiatric treatment for it. You want to recognize that there can be medical things in there, even if the pattern makes you think that it's psychological. Here are some various tools to help foster that process. Like I said, you can have the big blank body where people can just write in anywhere, where do you feel stuff? And you'd start noticing that, yeah, lots of people get tense shoulders when they're angry. Lots of people get stomach aches or headaches or heart palpitations when they're anxious. You know, all kinds of things like that. Some people get sweaty when they're scared. All those. This one helps them identify by that. Some people just recognize, oh yeah, I can identify with that. This is what I feel like too. This one's good because this is aimed at toddlers, people working with toddlers, to recognize the psychological underpinnings of some things you might see. Like if you see a 2 or 3-year-old whose lips are chapped all the time, like all the time chapped, you know that that's not just that they don't know how to use a chapstick. That is someone who is licking their lips constantly. Okay, why would you be licking your lips constantly? might be that it's a nervous tick and that you're anxious, and that's why you're licking your lips constantly. So recognizing that and asking about it. Once they can recognize what the emotions are, this is like the one slide thing that gets unpacked into an entire presentation for coping skills. Once they can recognize and name the feelings, then we want them to notice what things affect them: activities, environments, thoughts, situations, being with this person, doing this. And if you want to make it a stronger emotion, you do the things that make it stronger. If you want it to be a weaker emotion, you may do the things that make it weaker. You're not looking for an on-off switch, you're looking for a volume knob, always. If you're not sure what to even try, you look at the physical sensation or the behavioral urge and do the opposite. So if you feel really tight in your muscles, loosening up those muscles. You know, and this is, again, something we do kind of automatically. When you feel hot and flushed and on the verge of tears because you're so upset, you go and you get a cold face cloth and you wipe your face down with a cold wet face cloth, and you feel less hot and less flushed and less on the verge of tears, because if you reverse the physical sensation, that connection goes both ways. And the brain goes, huh, I'm not as hot, so I guess I'm not quite as sad as I thought I was. Now, it's not the magic cloth that erases all grief, but it does take it down a few notches. Once you can identify those things, then you can decide, hey, I'm going to actively do this one in order to modulate this emotion that I'm having, okay? Don't try to teach this when they're in the middle of an overwhelming emotion. That's not a teachable moment. So it really works best if they start with the feelings are small and can modulate it a little bit. And then they have their things ready for if the emotions get big, I already know what to reach for then. What's helpful is that they start getting in the habit of noticing the emotions when they're small, which can be hard because this might be someone who's been ignoring their emotions as hard as they can all their life. But you want to notice it and see it coming and do something early rather than squish down, squish down, squish down until it explodes and you're overwhelmed. We also want to notice the kind of attention and the kind of message we give about what different illnesses deserve as far as attention and respect and consideration go. You know, notice the kind and amount of attention you give to sick kids. And these were from some article about a school nurse, and I'm sure she's a lovely person, and it's just kind of a coincidence that I looked into that we have a picture of her beaming while she's with the kid in the wheelchair, and she's kind of smiling while she puts on the Band-Aid, and she's kind of glaring at this child who seems to just be talking about how they're feeling, you know. So recognizing if you have kind of the, oh yes, let me get you something, and conversely the, oh, you again reaction to someone who's coming with a lot of more squishy, vague somatic complaints that may well be psychological, or they might not even be saying anything somatic, they're just coming in for psychological ones. We want to also try to give attention to the healthy kids, which I know is really, really hard because a lot of us, if you're a school nurse or a counselor, you only see them when they need you and they come to you. So any opportunity you can find, interact with the kids in other contexts. And I used to stand at my door as the kids came in so I could just say hi to them as they walk into class. You know, any kind of just saying hi, touching base, going and doing classes and stuff like that, so that you can have some reality to the kids other than that's the person I go to when I'm hurt. Also lets them, if they want to come to you, not feel the need to make up a reason. They can come to you just because you're there as someone they can go to. Now, we do want to, with the kids we do see all the time, make sure that they do not get pigeonholed by us or by them, okay? So part of it is when we are taking care of them, being really warm to the kid and just all business to whatever the actual thing we need to do with them is, whether it's changing a bandage or doing a feeding tube or doing a finger stick or giving them a med, but be really warm to the kid and clinically them's the facts kind of thing to the injury or illness. If it's a temporary thing, remember their name afterwards and show interest in them afterwards. But you gotta be careful how you phrase it. Don't be like, oh, Johnny, I miss you. Remember how you used to come and see me every day for antibiotics? No. Instead, it's like, hey, Johnny, good to see you. What have you been doing lately? Oh, that's really interesting. Tell me more. You know, you want to be interested in them, but not in a way that says, gee, wasn't life better when you were sick and had to come to me all the time? And whenever, whether it's during or after, you want to do your best to try and discover some other aspect of this kid, any, you know, and we all need to do this because, I mean, pigeonholes exist because they're a real time saver. I mean, you know, as the kids walk by in the morning, I would find myself being like, okay, that's a kid with asthma, that's a kid with diabetes, that's a kid with eczema, that's the kid with anxiety, that's the kid who's really good at math, that's the kid who plays violin, that's the kid, you know. It's hard to remember more than one thing about any given kid, but it's really, really important, especially if the only thing you know about them is something that would not be great for that to be the center of their identity. And arguably any one thing probably shouldn't be the center of their identity, even if it's a positive thing, because what if they don't actually like playing violin? So, and then we need to try our best to teach the family to do the same with all of this as well. And this is where we do get a lot of nurses calling, and they'll be, you know, just starting off saying, and I think this family's kind of munchy, which is, of course, their way of saying that they think maybe this family is, you know, possibly having Munchausen by proxy. Okay. Anyone recognize this picture or know why this picture's here? Raise your hand if you do. This program I've had a hard time finding pictures for, but this one was easy because this is a picture of Baron von Munchausen. See, back when the DSM was allowed to have fun naming things, you know, they named it Munchausen because Baron von Munchausen was a real dude in the 1800s who went to whatever war was nearby there. And then he'd come back and tell the most elaborate stories. And we had a lot of sayings from him, like pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. He said that. And it said he would tell a story with a cliffhanger. And he'd be like, and then I was lost at the bottom of this 20-foot well and there was no way out. And they'd be like, but you're here now. How'd you get out? And say, oh, yeah. I just reached down and I grabbed my bootstraps and I pulled on them really hard and lifted myself out. So that's where he also had stories about riding a cannonball from one city to another. So the reason why Munchausen by proxy got named that, or Munchausen syndrome itself, was one of the hallmarks was that the person is so into it that they'll be really into the telling the history as well. So they will tell a long, elaborate history when you're the doctor saying, okay, so tell me what's going on. It will be a novel that they will tell you about everything going on. But that's a very subjective thing. Not everyone does that. And they wanted to have more clinical sounding terms. So now it's called factitious disorder imposed upon another. Yep, that rolls right off the tongue. Anyway, recognizing this is someone who, knowing that there is nothing physically wrong there, is taking steps to create a physical illness. It is vanishingly rare. It is very, very, very rare. Okay, so all the families of, oh yeah, I think they might be a little munchy. What you're seeing, and understandably overcalling Munchausen, is secondary gain. Because secondary gain is very, very common. By common, I mean universal. We all have it, okay? It is nature, human nature, that if something bad is happening in your life, you try to find some upside. You know, silver linings are there for us to find them. And we've all had times when like when your kid's sick and you have to stay home with your kid and miss work. Yeah, that kind of sucks. You wanted to be at work. Of course you did. But your kid's sick and they've got one of those really good diseases where they like just sleep all day. You know, they're not puking, you don't have to do anything. Or maybe they're just watching TV and your day is your own and you're like finally getting that closet cleaned. And so it's kind of, you know, this does not suck as much as you thought it was going to when the kid woke up saying he didn't feel good. And so you're like, okay, this is great. And the next day you go and you take their temperature and they don't have a fever. And you're like, one more day and I'd have the closet finished. Couldn't you be sick just one more day? This is so inconvenient to have to go back to work today. That would be secondary gain, where whatever's going on makes the fact that the kid is sick in some ways better than when they were healthy. Life gets better, and therefore you kind of want life to stay in the better mode. It might be relief from responsibility. You know, you got a chronically ill child and you can't work anymore. So you had to quit your job to stay home and take care of your kid. And oh yes, that's terrible. Except deep down, you kind of really hated that job and never really wanted it in the first place. Or maybe you always knew that your spouse could support the family if they just tried harder, but as long as you were working, they were kind of taking it easy. And now that that's not an option, they're finally doing their part, and you can be a stay-at-home parent like you wanted to. Or it might be that thing about other problems taking a back seat. Maybe only one parent wanted the divorce before the kid broke their leg. And now the kid and the other parent are kind of happy that that's not on the agenda anymore. And then there's the fact that other people treat you so much nicer when you've got a chronically ill child. I mean, I like to think that of parents out there, I like to think that pretty much all parents have, at least in their top 5 goals in life, being a good parent. One would hope, okay? And you can put a lot of effort into that goal. And if you are a pretty good average parent and you got a pretty good average kid, no one's going to actually praise you for all of this effort at all. It's going to be, yeah, that's what we all do. What, you want a parade? And then your kid gets sick. And suddenly, everyone around you is like, oh, you poor thing. Oh, how are you managing? Oh, you are so strong. Oh, they are so lucky to have you. Oh, you are so good to be doing all of this. And you finally get all of the acknowledgement for parenting that you were doing all along, except now it gets acknowledged. It's kind of nice. And it becomes more of your identity that, yes, I'm a good parent because I'm taking good care of my chronically ill kid. And subconsciously, or possibly even consciously, you realize that when your kid's healthy and you go back to being a regular parent, you're not going to be getting credit for being a good parent anymore. So what we want to do to help undo this is use the same approach we do with the kid of focusing on the whole person, okay? And you start by asking, what are they doing to take care of themselves as they're dealing with whatever this chronic illness is? Okay, they will pretty inevitably say, oh, there's no time to take care of myself. What do you think I am? I have to do everything taking care of my children. And that is your opening to say, okay, I totally understand that, but you need to make time to do stuff for you. In an ideal world, you'd be able to point out to them that they're a human being and they actually deserve to actually have their needs be met also. It will be a non-starter though. So what you say instead is, you cannot take care of someone else if you're running on empty yourself. You need to take care of yourself in order to be good enough at taking care of your child as you want to be. Then we also want to very gently point out what this general focus on the illness and this whole milieu is doing to the kid, what it's teaching the kid. It's teaching their kid that being sick is good. It's teaching them that it's the natural, normal, baseline way to be. However much they might hate being sick, it is familiar. And we want to make sure that they don't learn that they learn that their role in the family is not just being the sick kid, okay? It's also teaching your kid that their illness matters more than they do. It's really hard when you've poured so much time into just the symptom management and disease management that the moment you've got a spare minute of time, you want to go and do the other things. And thus all of your time with the kid is disease focused. Some of the other things you might be doing is, okay, I need to spend time with my other kids too. I know to be a good mom, I can't spend all my time with my sick kid. I need to also focus on my healthy kid. Yes. But you want to recognize that if you pictured your sick kid as being the kid and the sickness, you need to spend some time with the kid too, not just with the sickness. And you're also teaching the kid that they cannot function as long as they're sick. Well, at the same time, you're teaching them they're always going to be sick. If you've got a kid who's got migraines and they are in the habit of going home every time they have a headache, you want to look and say, okay, looking at this attendance pattern, if migraines continue to be part of your life into adulthood, you won't be able to hold a job. And that's not what anyone wants for this kid. And so it might be that, yeah, it really, really sucks that you've got migraines, but you might need to decide that you're not going to go home every time you have a headache. Other kids might go home when their headache is like a 4, and you might say, yeah, I don't go home unless my headache's like a 7. If I went home for every 4, I'd never be here. You want the kid to get that they can be as functional and normal as possible, even while they have whatever the illness is, be it anxiety, be it Crohn's disease, be it migraines, whatever it is, you want them to be doing as much of normal life as possible because they can do the math. Initially, they might really, really like going home and missing school and not being and not having to go to school all the time. But at some point, they will realize that, wow, I'm never going to have an adult life. And that's why there's such a high overlap between chronic illness and depression and suicidality and so on as the kids get older. So we want to help the parents teach the kid that, yeah, you can still be you and do stuff, maybe with modifications, but you can still be doing stuff even if you've got a chronic illness. People say, okay, that's nice preventatives, but what do we do when we've already got the family deeply entrenched in this process? You know, I've already got the kid who's coming to my office all the time, and the parent wants me to call them the moment the kid crosses my threshold, and the parent's gonna come and pick them up and take them to another specialist. What do we do with all of that? You do a lot of the same stuff, you just make it a lot more clear, pointed, and unambiguous, okay? You don't just show the kid that you value who they are above and beyond their illness. You say, you know, it's nice I get to see you every day when you come in to take your meds, but you know what I really look forward to? You telling me about that movie you saw last weekend because you see the greatest movies. You're way more interesting than what your illness is, you know, and just say that to them. And say to the parent, I think that your child really ought to be trying to stay in school more, because if they go home every time they have a small symptom, they will grow up thinking that they will never be able to be a functional adult, and that will be a real psychological damage to them as they get older. Do not argue with them, the kid or the parent, about whether what's going on is actually medical or emotional. You know, I've had lots of people where they're going to all these GI doctors. I don't think they have anything GI. I think it's all anxiety. You do not need to have that argument with them. Okay, for one thing, it's just going to set up an opposing role so that you've got no dialogue going at all. And there's the fact that by the time it's this entrenched, they've got both, okay? If they have a chronic medical illness, it's probably made worse by their emotions and they've got a lot of stress from it. If they've got an emotional illness causing medical symptoms, they've got those medical symptoms now. Those medical symptoms are real. So right now they kind of got both. So it would make sense to be addressing both. So yeah, go to all the GI doctors you want, but at the same time, you know, it's really stressful for kids to have a chronic illness like this. Have you considered having them see someone just to deal with all the stress around this diagnosis, or around not having a diagnosis and not knowing what's going on? We live in a world where anxiety is a mental illness that people are ashamed of. And if your kid is medically ill, they're used to people saying, oh, it's just anxiety, they're faking it. So anxiety might be a word that's kind of a hot flashpoint for them. Stress is what we are proud of, though, because stress is how we keep score about who's more important. So if instead you say it's really stressful for them to have to deal with this, they're not going to deny that. They're going to be like, yeah, it is. And say, so maybe if they saw someone to help them deal with that stress, that makes a lot more sense than saying, I think your child might have anxiety. You do want to be careful if you are remotely hinting that the symptoms are being exacerbated by or even caused by the psychological state. They assume that the reason why you are saying this is so that you can say, there's nothing to see here, they're faking it, they shouldn't be doing anything, no doctors, no treatment, just go to class and be dismissed. Don't be dismissive. So if there's a little hint of them being open to the idea that it's a psychogenic thing, continue to be offering attention and concern and treatment options to that option, rather than having it be, oh, good, I'm glad you're on board with this, now we can just send them back to class. We want to, as much as possible for everyone, validate that emotional distress is real. It's as real and as valid and as deserving of concern as physical distress. You know, if you're having so much, I mean, if you took your discomfort level, how much discomfort of anxiety are you in compared to how much discomfort of a headache are you in? For some reason, a kid could be at a 7 of anxiety discomfort and a 3 of headache discomfort. And the teacher's inclined to say, oh, well, for a headache, of course you can take a break. Oh, anxiety? Oh, it's just anxiety. We need to recognize that no, whatever is causing it, if it is impairing your function, it's real, okay? You feel what you feel. And anything saying you've got no right to feel this is why we've got so many people saying, oh yeah, I know I shouldn't be upset about this. Should is not a word that applies to emotions, okay? You feel what you feel. It might be that when you find out what's really going on in a situation, you change how you're feeling. But in the moment, you feel what you feel. We want to also notice whenever people are being very trivializing to emotional issues, which people are all the time. You know, I put this thing here without a number on it because I ain't sending this to anyone. I do not want people printing this out and passing it around because I hate this thing. I don't know if you can read the fine print on it, but it's, you know, Mental Health Day. We've all heard that phrase, right? Mental Health Day. I hate that meme because this is what everyone thinks it means, you know? Let's play hooky. What would you like to do? People think Mental Health Day is, oh yeah, I'm not really sick. I'm fine. I could go to work, but you know, I just need a break. So I'm going to go do something fun. So I'm going to take a mental health day. And that's my term for I'm kind of faking being sick in order to take a vacation, which is extraordinarily rude to the people who have mental health issues that impair their function so much that they feel like maybe they need to stay home. Maybe they need to take a break. Maybe they need to, you know, oh, my anxiety, I don't know if I can even function today. You know, maybe, you know, I've got enough sick time. Maybe I should call out sick. I'll just call because, you know, I need a mental health day. Oh, wait, that means I'm faking it. Because that's what that word has come to mean. So we want to recognize when someone says, oh yeah, I took a mental health day. Say, yeah, you shouldn't call it that. You know, let that be for people who are having mental health issues, unless that is the way they're using it. But if they're using it as pretty much, yeah, I just had to take a mental health day and I just, you know, went and saw my friends and, you know, whatever they did that was clearly recreational and not mental health healing, okay? I guess seeing your friends right now would be really healing though, so that's a terrible example. Okay, and we want to make sure that we give emotional and psychological issues sympathy and accommodations too. If someone really needs to take a break, they should be able to take a break. If someone comes in and they're really, really upset, we should be giving them sympathy for their emotions. Now, they might really resist that if you start saying, oh, yeah, I know you've got a headache, but really I'm more concerned about the fact that you seem really anxious. They might think that that's your backdoor way of saying, see, I told you your headache's fake, go back to class. So you want to make sure that they are not thinking that you're buying into that idea that if their physical symptoms are psychogenic, that it's not real, and therefore you're going to withdraw the sympathy as soon as you trick them into admitting that. And people say, but we can't give them all accommodations because, you know, they're not really sick. I mean, it's just anxiety, okay? And yes, I know that's the inclination, that's the urge people have, and say, no, but they are, okay? They really are sick, all right? It is a real headache. It is a real stomach ache. It might be real puke on the floor. What it isn't is contagious. As with everything, we want to treat things in the manner that they should be treated to get better, okay? Not just what would get them out of sight, okay? So we do treat what the physical complaints are. Whatever the physical, you know, if you got a stress headache, yes, I'm gonna give you something for your stress headache. But I might suggest that you lie down in a quiet room for 10 minutes first and then decide if you need the Tylenol. You know, I think a lot of the kids who come to get Tylenol, most of the reason their headache goes away is because they got to walk out of class for 10 minutes and they drank a full glass of water and they're probably dehydrated. It's probably virtually nothing to do with the Tylenol, and Tylenol does a number on your liver, so you shouldn't be taking it willy-nilly just for whatever. So be conservative about how you treat the physical complaints without saying, no, it's not a real headache, but say, no, it is a real headache. But the first thing we want to do for a headache is potentially just get into a quiet environment for a few minutes and then decide whether or not it needs medicine. And when we're dealing with the physical complaints, we always remember that we're talking to the person and dealing with the complaint rather than really interacting with the complaint while the person's just kind of there, okay? We want to notice if there is secondary gain going on. Is there something about this dynamic that is making the kid, milk it, try to prolong or exaggerate or jump to feeling sick as soon as possible because being sick is better for them than being healthy. We want to figure out what it is they're getting out of being sick and try to have sickness not be the way to get that need met. It might be a need that deserves to be met. It might be a need that doesn't really deserve to be met, but you want to make sure that being sick is not the way to get it. Part of that is, in the real world, being sick kind of sucks, and therefore there's usually downsides to being sick and upsides to getting healthy because the downsides go away. And so that's what we want to try and focus on, is try to get that more natural cycle to be happening more. A really good example of this is concussion. Okay, concussion is, of course, a medical situation. That's neurological enough that I get to talk about anyway, okay? It's also because it's so behavioral as well. Have you noticed, raise your hand if there have been like more concussions and more kids on concussion protocols than in past years. And it's like, wow, it's just going through the roof. Yeah, tons more than ever before. And the thing I do want to point out is the reason why we hear a lot more about concussion nowadays than we did, 10, 20 years ago, is that it's just in the last couple of decades that we've come to decide that brain damage is bad. Okay, when I was a kid, we were kind of okay with it. We didn't wear helmets and we didn't do concussion protocols at all. I've got the summer I was 8 years old, I totally don't remember, and it's a real funny story. But anyway, so we do want to pay attention to concussion. Concussion is a bruise on the brain. Unfortunately, we can't actually see it the way you can a bruise on the arm. Okay, and so the way you tell if the bruise is getting better or not is from symptoms that are what the person feels. And so they are very subjective. We have to take the kid's word for it. So it's you go on brain rest where you can't do anything, and then you gradually come off brain rest, depending on whether the symptoms are happening. You're following brain rest protocol, and then you go and do something for an hour and the headache comes back or you start to feel queasy. Okay, too soon, you go back on brain rest protocol. If you do fine, okay, now you can spend more time off of the protocol, okay? The problem is we get kids who are like, yeah, I gotta stay on brain rest for months, okay? And thus they do nothing in school because, yeah, I'm on brain rest. You can't make me do that, I'm on brain rest. And the thing is, what we need to shift here is say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But when you start to come off just a couple hours a day, those hours need to be during the school day. Those are the first hours you come off. So if you went to a movie last night, okay, that means you're not on brain rest anymore, because if you had evening hours available to be off of brain rest, you don't need to be on it during the day. Evenings and home should be the last time. And part of it is helping the parents reinforce what exactly is brain rest so that they're actually doing it at home. That's the thing, they only do it at school, they don't do it at home. Yes, you're not supposed to read. That also means no screens. No TV, no movies, no social media, no texting, nothing with screens. It's really boring when you're on brain rest. My daughter had a major concussion and she's like, oh, can't I just have shows that I've seen before? And I'm like, yes, of course, here, let me put it in. And then I put a blanket over the TV and said, you can just listen to it. After all, you know what it looks like, you've seen it before. They will say, oh, I can't do gym because, brain rest. And gym is an important one because a subsequent bonk within 6 months can be way more damaging than the first concussion. So yeah, they can't do gym. They also can't do sports. They also can't do anything involving running or riding a bike or pretty much moving faster than their own speed of walking. And they can't go higher than their own height. So no climbing, no jumping, lots of other things that they might be doing. And you're like, okay, if you can do that, then you can be doing gym. And they'll say, oh, well, I can't do the homework because I can't concentrate because, brain rest. Like, okay. That does mean you can't drive then, because we do like to pretend that concentration is an aspect of the driving process. And so also listening to loud music, various other things like that. So if they are actually really following brain rest at home, then it makes sense. And people say, oh, but wait, if we're just taking their word for it and now it's more interesting to get off of brain rest, don't we worry that they'll start fudging the symptoms and denying that they have symptoms that they really have, and isn't that dangerous? And fortunately, recent studies have said, no, really, it's not that dangerous. You cannot think yourself into brain damage. If a kid tries to participate all day in class because they really want to be able to go to a movie with their friends that night, if it was too much, they're going to be too queasy to go to the movie, so it'll be self-limiting. So we don't have time for a break, so we'll just move on. You've been taking breaks all along, right? If you need a break, you can take a break. All right, so now we will focus on conversion disorder. Okay, conversion disorder, as I said, is a special subset of somatic disorder, where again, it's primarily a psychological phenomenon that presents as neuromuscular symptoms, okay? The reason why it's called conversion disorder is because it's often very sudden in reaction to a specific stressor that is very obviously the brain converting this stress or this trauma into this physical phenomenon. I mean, sometimes it's not obvious, but sometimes it's like a kid sees some horrible thing and the next day they wake up and they're blind. Their eyes function fine, their brain is neurologically intact, but they cannot see. Even the kid can figure out that it's their brain going, yeah, we never want to see anything terrible like that again, so we'll just never see anything, and that'll help. Identifying, drawing that connection does not make it better, does not make the eyes turn on, any more than going, yeah, of course I've got a headache, I'm really stressed about this, makes your headache disappear. You know, knowing what's causing it does not change the actual phenomenon. It presents as neurological or some motor symptoms such as numbness, paralysis, blindness, deafness, and everybody's favorite, pseudo seizures, which are now called psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, or PNES. And the first time I heard this, I was listening to a video and a doctor was talking about how a lot of his patients have PNES. What did he just call his patients? Oh, PNES, got it, okay. But there's no physical cause for it, no neurological physical cause. Now, if you think it's hard to pin down whether that stomach ache is medical or psychogenic, that ain't nothing compared to trying to figure out whether there's a neurological thing going on or a psychological thing going on to cause it. So, but even though there's nothing physically causing it, they are not faking it, and they cannot just decide to not have it. Same as you can't just decide to not have a stress headache or a panic attack, or say, you know, oh yeah, I know that that arm's not there, so that phantom limb I feel, it's just not really real, so I'm just not going to feel it anymore. It does not work that way. So now people frequently at this point are like, why are you even spending so much time on this? You know, it seems really, really rare, and it is pretty rare. It's as rare as multiple sclerosis. Okay, and lots of people are like, I've heard of it. Isn't it like this trendy thing that like teenage girls have been doing recently? It is more likely among girls. The age is actually more in the 20s, but there's a lot of teenagers who have it. But it has been around forever, basically. There's a real good argument for this being potentially what was going on during the Salem witch trials. So, but people will say, yeah, but it's still, you know, why are you telling us this? We're never going to have to deal with it in our school. And if that is true, God bless you. You are so lucky. Because if this happens in your school, your life gets way too interesting for a very long time because of all of our lovely psychological diagnoses and issues. This sucker's contagious. This one can spread like wildfire until you've got a major percentage of your student body dropping like flies. So you really want to know about it and be able to intervene early and often to keep that from happening, okay? You want to recognize that all the things that on a conscious or subconscious level demonstrate to a child that being sick is better than being well are on public display when someone is having seizure-like activity or seizure activity. You can get an outbreak of pseudo seizures because you have someone who has epileptic seizures, because every wallflower in the building, when they see everybody dropping everything and being very concerned for this person, has the possibility, depending on their wiring and depending on their coping skills, of having some part of their mind go, you know, if I fell and twitched, maybe people would care about me more too. And again, frequently it's completely subconscious. It's not something that they're deciding consciously at all, okay? And it can happen if they're seeing pseudo seizures or if they're seeing primary seizures, you know, neurogenic seizures, or even if they're seeing pseudo seizures in someone who is miserable about it, who is embarrassed and ashamed, because what we tend to picture is that it's something that's attention drawing, and frequently that is the dynamic, but not always. Sometimes it's the person is absolutely humiliated, but other people may still have a subconscious tendency to emulate it. So the diagnosis. The good news is it's not for you to diagnose. You do not have to diagnose this. The bad news is you're not allowed to diagnose this because you're not qualified. It needs a full neurological workup. I do want to point out that a full neurological workup is more than just a doctor's note, even if the doctor is a neurologist. We had one school where a girl had seizure-like activity on a field trip, and she goes and she comes back with a note signed by a neurologist, psychogenic pseudo seizures. All she needs to do is go lie down in a quiet place if she's feeling anxious. Which it was fortunate the nurse's office was the quiet place she'd go to, because it made it luckily that that's where she was when she had a full-on grand mal epileptic seizure a couple weeks later. As it turned out, the neurologist was in the ER when they brought her in, and he's like, oh yeah, teenage girl, seizure-like activity, must be pseudo seizures, and didn't do a full workup, okay? So you do want to make sure that they actually check, and a person could have both. What you might see though that makes you start to think it could be pseudo seizures, you know, the sort of things that lean you that way, is first of all, the kid fits the sort of person where this is feeding a need that they have, because you can see the need they're getting fed, okay? They might have problems around attention, around feeling worthy, around being able to express their emotions. There's also a psychological thing we sometimes see where they are just way too chill about this. I knew one girl in inpatient who would have periodic paralysis. Her legs would just go away. They'd come back, they'd go away pretty unpredictably. And she'd been hospitalized for like 18 months. And she's got on the wall all the pictures of her friends going to prom, going to graduation, and so on. And you'd think most teens would be beside themselves that they're missing all that. And she's just like, oh yeah, graduation's next week. I guess, well, at some point they'll figure this out, and then, you know, I'll take the GED or something, I'll be fine. And she was just totally mellow about it in a very kind of creepy way. You also will see seizure activity that does not look like typical seizures. I'm going to come back to this slide, but I'll step ahead to this handy table. You do want to recognize that this is compared to grand mal seizures, because partial seizures can have a lot of the things that fit psychogenic ones. But things like, for those who don't know, an epileptic seizure is an electrical storm in the brain, okay? It eats up all the energy in the brain and toasts the brain. It is by definition short, because if it keeps going, it causes brain damage. That is why it is a 911 call immediately. You don't want to wait to see if it's going too long, because by the time it's going too long, if you call 911, then yeah, doom. Pseudo seizures can go on for hours, okay? There's some physical things, like usually the eyes are open, and with pseudo seizures, they usually close them, and if they're closed, so like they resist you opening them, that's a strong sign of it. Things like incontinence and turning blue and things like, you know, the more physiological things tend to not happen. You'll see different movement patterns. You can watch videos if you want to really try and get a sense of it. Usually people with epileptic seizures are pretty quiet about it, okay? Maybe some grunting noises. With pseudo seizures, they scream sometimes. It can get loud, especially once it's not visible. If it's feeding a need to be noticed, and they aren't someplace where enough people will be noticing it, it will get fed more by being loud. And then afterwards, like I said, neurogenic seizure toasts the brain. So afterwards, the person is wiped. They might have a headache. They're almost always confused and drowsy, and they fall into a deep, restful sleep, okay? With pseudo seizures, they can be perky right afterwards, sometimes a little bit during. And so The other real important thing that I think I've got back over here, yes. Okay, so they're not confused afterwards, no incontinence. They are aware of the environment during the seizure for a pseudo seizure, not for an epileptic seizure. So if someone knows things that happened during their seizure and you know for sure that they didn't hear it from someone else, that would be a very strong indication that it was a pseudo seizure. You'll also see interesting patterns in when the seizures happen. Okay, both of them, they will increase with stress, but pseudo seizures decrease with inconvenience, because remember, the pseudo seizure is feeding a psychological need, a secondary gain that the person may or may not be aware of, or may not be tangibly wanting to be fed, but it's feeding a psychological gain. If it ain't going to be fed, the seizure won't happen. So for example, a person with newly diagnosed neurological seizures, they can never be left alone, because if they have a seizure while they're by themselves, they could die before anyone finds them. If you get someone with pseudo seizures that are clearly fed by attention, they can be alone, because when they're alone, they won't have one because they won't get attention. So, and so you'd look at this where oh, so they just, you know, like the girl with the paralysis, her legs always came back when she needed to go to the bathroom. And so we never had to do incontinence care. So you look at that kind of thing and think, oh, well, it's because she's faking it. But they are not faking it. It's just that the subconscious brain goes, yeah, we don't want other people wiping our bums, so let's have the legs work now. You know, it's the subconscious, not the conscious. They are not faking it. The really down there is sometimes they're faking it. And that puts us into a subtype of our subtype of within psychogenic seizures. We have the sort of uncontrolled and the what we call behavioral, where the person is consciously doing this in order to get the need met. Now, if you think telling pseudo seizures from epileptic seizures is hard, telling behavioral from uncontrollable is even harder. Fortunately, you treat them the same, so you don't have to figure out which one it is. Okay, so the way you're going to treat them is you treat pseudo seizures just like neurological seizures. Okay, main thing is you work really hard to not say pseudo seizures and real seizures. I'm very proud that I haven't made that slip yet. Part of it is that the terminology shift as this became, you know, psychogenic non-epileptic seizures left us with neurogenic seizures or epileptic seizures. And a bunch of us went through nursing school at a time when epilepsy was considered a insult word. And so it was kind of beaten out of us. You never say epilepsy. And so now trying to bring it back is kind of hard. And so when I'm coming along and saying pseudo seizures like epileptic seizures, part of my brain goes, no, not allowed to say epileptic. And then random words get thrown in, like sometimes real, which is not the right word. Real is not the right word. These are both real seizures. Okay, pseudo seizures, you treat them like neurogenic seizures. Which includes calling 911, unless you've got a definitive doctor's order not to. And by definitive, I don't just mean the doctor wrote pseudo seizures. The doctor wrote pseudo seizures, 911 need not be called. Okay, because like I said, it could be a misdiagnosis. They could have both. You do not want to be the one standing there watching a kid have an epileptic seizure until they slip into a coma and not call 911 and say, well, because I didn't think I had to, because the doctor said it was just pseudo seizures. You don't want to be that person, okay? And so you really want to make sure that the doctor has really done due diligence and is being very, very, very clear, okay? Even if you've got that clear order, unless going home feeds the need. You know, if going home and parental attention is part of what you're trying to deal with, that's a separate thing. But for most of them, it happens in school because the environment of being in school supports it happening. So that, combined with the fact that you do not want to be holding responsibility for not calling 911, means that you want the parents to come and pick this child up immediately. So as soon as possible, you get the parents to come and take the kid away. So, so that it's their responsibility, and also so you don't have a bunch of staff tied up, as I said, potentially for hours monitoring this. Okay. Now, since they arise from a psychological conflict, they should be dealing with the psychological conflict. So the child really, really, really should be in therapy. They do need to make sure they get a good therapist who actually understands conversion disorder. If they get a therapist who's like, oh, so you're having fake seizures, huh? Are you doing it for attention? No, not the right therapist. Go get a new one. Okay. And there are therapists out there who are wrong, idiots even. So, and it's also frequently all that stuff that we said earlier about somatic disorders in general will help with this, as far as helping people be able to verbalize their feelings, helping people be able to meet their emotional needs in a way that does not involve needing to be a sick person, needing to be a publicly all hands on deck sick person. Okay. If you can identify what the secondary gain is, that's great. You figure out then, is it a gain that they really ought to be able to meet, and now we need to help them meet it in a healthier way? And then stop meeting it in this way. Generally, you know, if it's for attention, you're not going to say, okay, well, I'll just ignore them, make them go into attention withdrawal. No, that's not, you don't. People deserve attention. People view attention-seeking behavior as an intrinsic, yeah, that's something we should ignore. It's like, no. If it's, I never want to go to school, that's something we might not want to be supportive of. But if it's, I want to feel like people care about me, yeah, we want them to feel like people care about them. Now the puzzle is, how can we help them feel that without feeling like they have to be having a seizure to believe that that's true? So you want to figure out what the secondary gain is, and it's not always attention. You know? Frequently with pseudo seizures it is, because they are such a public thing, but you might have other things that are a little bit more subtle. I have one school where there was a girl who'd had a concussion, and the concussion symptoms were persisting, but very spottily. So it did not look like it was a neurological thing continuing, but it was interfering with school, and she was miserable because she really wanted school to be going better. She was not having a good time here. She was not feeling, oh yes, my needs are being met, kind of feeling to it. And talking to them after a while, they said, yeah, it's so sad because this family, they've been through so much. I mean, before, you know, like DCF was even involved, and it's a single mom, but now mom's got her act together, and mom's like taking care of business and taking her to the doctor and really on top of taking care of all this. I'm like, oh, okay. Well then, how about this? Find someone else to take her to her doctor's visits. Mom needs to take her bowling or for manicures or something. She needs to have positive experiences with mom, because on a subconscious level, her brain is probably saying, the way to keep mom being a good mom is by having mom need to manage the concussion symptoms. And so if you can get mom to demonstrably be a good mom in a non-medical context, then the medical context will start to fade away. As I said, it's such a puzzle to figure out. It's a real good time to call me and describe the situation. Even if you think you got a grip on it, fresh eyes are always helpful for noticing this, that detail that you might give a try to, okay? Now, as I said, one of your main goals here is to minimize contagion. You do not want this spreading through the school. Fortunately, the way you can do that is by, at the same time, protect their privacy and have that be the goal, which of course they might be frustrated by if the need that's being met is having as much attention as possible. The things we do to protect their privacy are cutting off attention, but that's the goal too. They just don't know it. So we're going to protect your privacy, starting with no discussion of this anywhere where the other kids can hear it. You do not want to have all the kids hearing, oh yeah, they're like the center of the universe. Everyone's always talking about them. I wish I was the center of the universe, on a subconscious level, you know. So, and this means pretty much you don't even talk to the adults unless they really are part of the response team. You have a very specific response team to events, and no one else needs to be in these conversations other than to say, yeah, something might go on and your job is to take everyone else away. You want to have part of that response team be people who will hold up a visual shield. So you have a couple people and a sheet. You don't put over them, obviously, but you have a couple of people who will hold a sheet up so that whatever's going on is invisible, okay? because the visual input of seeing a person having seizure-like activity will feed that possibility in any other kid. So you really want to be not hiding it, but protecting their privacy by keeping that from being visible. And you get the other kids out of there. I mean, if possible, you get that kid with the pseudo seizures out there so that it isn't that they have managed to cordon off an entire wing of the building all by themselves. Again, that gives a feeling of power to the situation that you do not want to be giving. So if possible, you get the kid out of there. If not possible, you get everyone else out of there, okay? And as I said, you send the kid home. And if there's safety concerns, you might even exclude them from school for a while. Now, you cannot be giving them like suspension style, you're excluded kind of punitive feeling things for the seizure, but you definitely can have semi-punitive or openly punitive things regarding their behavior around the seizure. There's one school at a tech school where the girl would feel one coming on and she's like, oh, it's starting. And the teacher is like, okay, then move away from the concrete saw. And he goes, no, I can't possibly move. I must stay here. And it's like, no. Call bullshit on that one. Okay, now you are not safe. You are pointedly, formerly, since they come on slowly and there's time to move you, you could have stayed in school. But now that we see that you cannot safely be in school, like if you had someone who it might happen on a stairwell, so you set them up with the elevator and they're like, I don't feel like it. I'm going to use the stairs anyway. Okay, well, if you are choosing to be dangerous, then yeah, you can't come to school until you are without seizures for a while in order to have it be safer. While you are supervising it, you want to make sure that everybody is conveying to them that they are safe, because it can be very, very scary. I mean, if you've ever had a seizure, it is scary. Having a pseudo seizure, also scary. So it's a very, very scary situation. So you want to reassure them, you're fine, you're safe. We're here, you're fine, you're safe. But do it in a just matter-of-fact kind of way, kind of sound almost bored, okay? Like you're thinking and doing other things, but you're watching like a hawk with that magical peripheral vision, okay? You want to completely, as much as possible, reduce the drama around the situation, not people running and screaming, and trust me, reducing the drama is a really difficult task because this situation is intrinsically dramatic. But you reduce it as much as possible. You have it be very matter of fact, okay? You might even feign distraction by having conversation. You got the people there holding the shield. You stand there and you just chat with them about other stuff. Anything that's okay for the kid to be hearing, remember the kid can hear what you're saying. So talk about movies, talk about boring movies, okay? So that does not look like they're the center of the universe. Yeah, you're here, I'm here, you're safe. So what'd you do last week? That sort of thing. You do your best to not show any emotion to the child around this, so yes, I care about you and I'm keeping you safe, but not, oh, you poor thing, I feel so sorry for you. Also not, oh, you're doing this again, I'm so frustrated, but nothing, not hyper concern, not irritation, just matter of fact, yep, I'm here, I care about you, yep. And again, when you see them in a non-seizure context, then you show them more emotion and you show them lots of warmth then. But during the seizure, it's very flat, okay? And throughout the whole school, you want to really pour on letting every kid in the school know that they are wonderful, valuable people and not wallflowers, and you love them and you care about them, and you're gonna focus on them a lot too, without them having seizures, and good luck doing that because there's no time, because you've got so much time wrapped up chasing the kids that are having seizures. So the key points for all of this is you do not need to determine whether any complaint that a child has is medical organic or psychogenic in origin, okay? Instead, feel free as a teacher, if you're a teacher, to ask, what does going to the nurse get you? Or what do you hope to, what would you do if you were at home right now? Well, why don't you just go back to class then, because you could do that in class? What benefit would you get from what you're trying to get? And be an open enough conversation around that they might actually be able to start divulging some of those secondary gains. Like, yeah, but at home, my mom would actually be there and she's never home. I never get to see her. Things like that. And then you want to help them try to find a way to meet that benefit in as healthy a way as possible. It's also really good to point out whatever intrinsic downside there might be to the choices they're making. You know, on the teacher's end of thing, if a kid's like, I gotta go to the nurse, I've got a headache, feeling free to turn and say, okay, if you go right now, you're not going to hear what the homework is, so you're going to have to come back after school to find out what the homework is, and you might miss your bus. Or you could wait 10 minutes, find out what the homework is, and then if you still have a headache, go to the nurse then. You know, getting them to recognize that there is a downside to the, I'm sick, I must be taken care of right now in this precise way. If you can anytime you can recognize what's going on underneath so that you can have as much compassion and sympathy as possible is good. So recognize that if you've got a really, really, really somatic kid, either they don't know how to interpret these feelings. You know, for a lot of what we do is teaching kids what pain is okay and what pain is dangerous. I had one kid, he rolled his ankle and he's limping afterwards, and he comes limping in like 3 hours afterwards, and I talked to him for a minute, and then he goes running out, and the teacher's like, I knew he was faking it. I'm like, no, he wasn't faking it. He didn't know what the pain meant because he'd rolled his ankle, so every time he took a step, there was a twinge. He didn't know whether that meant his ankle was breaking or what. And so I explained to him that, yeah, that much pain is natural. It's going to get gradually better over the next couple of days. That's why we call it getting hurt, because it hurts. And it's okay to run on it as long as you don't roll it again. And then he could relax and run on it. But he was not limping to milk it. He was limping because he didn't know what it meant. So we want to help them understand what these sensations mean. Okay. And then if you got a kid who's being really somatic, recognizing that if they're kind of desperate to be identified as sick, it's because being sick to them is better than being healthy. It might be that being recognized as actually sick because they have a medical thing going on is better than having a medical thing going on and having everyone tell you to suck up and deal because it's fake. That could be the dynamic too. But you want to recognize for some kids, it really is that even though they don't feel terribly medically sick, if they can get you to treat them like a sick person, they will feel validated by that. And that's kind of sad. And we'd like to actually work on that dynamic, okay? We want to recognize if it's that they cannot express their emotions and help them learn how to do that so that their emotions don't get channeled as much into physical sensations, because they will always be going into physical sensations. It's just as adults, we pretty much automatically translate that back into emotions and we barely even register the physical. You know, when you start to get a little headache, you recognize that you're stressed. So, and we want to recognize that it's a physical manifestation, a real, tangible, existent physical sensation of a psychological state. We want to make sure that collaboration is happening, if at all possible. These are the kids we play ping pong with so much, for the teachers and the nurses and back, and you know, the teacher's like, why are you sending this nauseous kid back? They might puke in class. And the teacher and the nurse is like, why are you sending this anxious kid to me? They ought to stay in class in order to overcome their anxiety in class, because they aren't communicating about what's going on. So we really want to make sure that everybody is communicating as much as possible about what they think is going on. Because until you get as much data from everyone, no one actually does know what's going on. You know, lots of times it's they send the kid down and they know the kid looked fine, and then I asked for the homework to be passed in, and then all of a sudden they need to go to the nurse. But the nurse doesn't know that. Or the nurse knows that the mom called that morning and said that they just told the kids that morning that they're about to have a divorce. And that's probably why the kid has a raging stomachache all day, but the teacher doesn't know that. So as much as you're allowed to, communication will really, really help. We want to be working together to figure out what is actually driving this sensation. If it's an infectious or medical situation, then we treat it medically. That makes sense. You know, if it's infectious, we want them away from everyone. You know, if it's caused by something psychogenic like anxiety is really, really common for this. We want to recognize that and treat that, not recognize that and say, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. The thing is, the treatment for anxiety is going back to class. We just need to make it really clear to the kid that the reason why we're sending them back to class is because running away will make the anxiety stronger, will give it more power. And the way to give it less power is to go back to class. And if you think it's pointless to explain this to a kid, I have one kid that I was treating in private practice, and I told her just once about this phenomenon, that the more you run away, the more the fear builds up. And so going home when you feel anxious will make it stronger. If you get a stomach ache and you stay in school, and then when you get so anxious you throw up, that's the day you get sent home, your body is going to go straight to throwing up faster, because that's what succeeded in getting you to run away. The more you feed that anxiety, the bigger it gets. And before the very next visit, the mom was calling to tell me that she had been in class, felt anxious, went to the bathroom, was gone a long time. And when she came back, the teacher's like, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, I threw up a little bit, but I'm okay now." And the teacher's, "Oh, you've got to go to the nurse." And she went to the nurse and she said, "I know that it's anxiety, and I know that if I go home, it's going to get worse. So I should go back to class now." They're able to understand this if we treat them with the respect of explaining it to them. Okay, so we want to make sure that they get that staying as close to what you're afraid of as possible is the best treatment. And doing stuff. It's not just, oh, suck up and deal, there's nothing to be done, but okay, do stuff to counteract the feeling. You know, if you get stomach aches when you're anxious, yes, we'd like to treat that stomach ache, both so that you aren't sitting there with a stomach ache, and because if we make the stomach ache go away, you'll feel less anxious, because the communication goes in both directions. And if we think that what they're doing, what they're feeling is attention seeking, give them attention, okay? Ignoring attention seeking behavior is really, really cruel. I mean, especially in this population, because what they're basically saying is, I'm not deserving of attention, but my injury is, or my illness is. And to that, do you really want to turn and say, "Oh no, you got that wrong. Your illness isn't worthy of attention either. Both of you, leave." Because that's basically what you'd be doing. Instead, we want to be giving them attention for other reasons. If you got someone who's really, really attention manipulative is another word they'll complain about sometime, do it on a schedule. Say, okay, you're gonna get good, juicy attention from the person you like best every day at 11 o'clock, no matter what else happens. If you have a meltdown at 10, yep, you'll get attention, but not the good kind you'll get from someone else. And you will still see the person at 11. You know, you can't sabotage it, and you can't get extra. You can't get extra and you can't get rid of it. It's there for you just because you're you. You don't have to do anything. You get it just because you're worthy of it. And that's what you want to be teaching them. And it's very important to support each other, especially if you got pseudo seizures going. It's really important to have time for everyone on the response team to get together and be able to talk freely. It will initially start off as an open place to complain bitterly about how frustrating this is and how upsetting it is and how angry you are about all of it. And that's okay, but you do want to make sure it then moves into problem solving and support and doesn't just become a trash talking session. But you do have to have a place where you can express the negative feelings too, or else they will blurt out in the most inopportune moments. So various resources. There's lots of good resources out there about pseudo seizures and about conversion disorder. There's not as much stuff just about somatoform. This article, if you read this article, okay, once you read it, you're required to then contact me and say, okay, so tell me what's totally wrong about this, because this is an article complaining about somatic disorders being in the DSM-5 of how terrible it is, because now no one's going to get medical workups. By definition, you have to do a medical workup. We're just entertaining the idea that they could have both, or they could have just psychogenic, or they could have medical, but we do, by definition, you have to do a medical workup. But this is saying that having that diagnosis available at all means that people will just get shunted off to psychiatry and not get medical care. So, but if you want to read an article that I screamed at the whole time, go for it, and then call up and let me scream at it, not you. And then I always like to have videos and other things. This is a fantastic podcast that you should listen to that is about amplified musculoskeletal pain syndrome, which is a form of somatic disorder where the nerves get reinforced to feel more and more and more and more pain. It's a really fascinating article about that, and I'm running out of time, so I can't tell you more about it, but it's a podcast, it's not an article. Fascinating, listen to it, think about somatic disorders, think about anxiety, think about how what basically is saying is the more attention you pay to pain, the more pain people feel. And that can be a problem. And we see the same thing happening with anxiety. You don't want to be ignoring it, but you want to recognize the feedback loop, okay? There's various articles about, or various videos about things. I want to highlight this one. It's a TED Talk from a woman who had an undiagnosable musculoskeletal disease. It's really worth watching to understand what it feels like to have your life and your body falling apart and everyone around you telling you, yeah, it's all in your head, nothing's wrong with you, and not offering anything, you know, not offering help trying to solve it, and then also not even offering sympathy for the fact that your life's falling apart. And raise your hand if you're wondering what the pictures of the goats are. Yeah. I like to have pictures, and there's like no way to have pictures of seizures that aren't, you know, like really inappropriate. And so those are myoclonic goats. When you startle them, their legs go stiff and they tip over. There's lots of really funny videos, but it's kind of mean to laugh at them, so I had to look very hard for one where they don't laugh so much. Okay, and then also apps are always nice. So this is a nice journaling light one. This is a nice, all kinds of fidgets and tactile things on your phone, which is not tactile, but they make it work. Give it a shot. And then T2 Mood Tracker is really good. You can set it up with whatever symptoms you want. It comes preloaded with depression and anxiety and stress and head injury, the symptoms, not the actual experience. And it cues you to scale your symptoms, and then it'll give you a chart graph of how they've changed over time. So if you're having a really bad day, you'll be able to look and be able to tell a difference between downhill no brakes and, oh yeah, just a bad day in an overall improving trend. So, so there's that. And talking about any nurse's kid, yes, one of the things for Munchausen syndrome, it's almost listed as a risk factor, is having a nurse for a mother. And part of that is because, as we know, doctors get very suspicious when the nurse knows more than them about something. And unsurprisingly, a parent often knows more about what's going on with their kid than the doctor who met them just a week ago. And when the parent also has medical knowledge and they bring that to bear, it raises all the doctor's red flags. So you do want to be careful, because the distinction between, I just know this because I'm a nurse and I care about my kid and that's why I want to stay here and really make sure things are done right, is hard for them to tell apart from, I've looked everything up online, so I know this, and I want to stay here so that when you turn your back, I can do things. So, okay, so is anxiety always or sometimes comorbid with pseudo seizures? Frequently enough that when I wrote this, it felt like it was basically anxiety number 2 until I actually wrote anxiety number 2. It's very, very often anxiety. It's also very, very, very often PTSD. When you're talking conversion disorder, you know, talking about that whole, you see something and your eyes just shut down, it's usually, okay, that's the last straw kind of seeing something. It's the most recent in a series of traumas, which is part of why just making that connection doesn't turn the eyes on, is because, yeah, your brain's like, okay, we're done here. And you need to do the work on all that trauma, not just the most recent one. So PTSD is very often comorbid with it as well. It's basically the brain has too much to deal with. And so what constitutes too much depends on how much can it deal with in the first place and how much has it been given. Sometimes it's that it couldn't deal with that much to start with, so relatively little stress pushes it over the edge. Or sometimes it's like, no, it could deal with a hell of a lot and the world gave it even more than that. So those are things to definitely look for. Depression could also be comorbid. I don't see it as often. I think it's because when depression gets that deep, the underlying subconscious assumption is that you're not worthy of any attention. And it's kind of that, if I have a seizure, no one will come feeling to it. So, okay, when we return from COVID, I'm concerned about how we will handle the frequent visiting students who have somatic symptoms. They will be in the same office as students with communicable disease symptoms, both real, handled, different, and space issues. I feel like we need a flow chart for teachers to know when to send students to nurse's office. Have you discussed this idea yet? That's what our whole meetings yesterday were all about. And you know it, weren't you there? I thought you were there. Anyway, yeah, yesterday and that is a real good segue. Thank you for giving me that segue. I will in all likelihood, well, actually this weekend with the update, I'm going to be sending everybody a link to a survey that I've already sent to all the nurses. And what that is a place for people to brainstorm all of their concerns about coming back in the fall. And a big chunk of that is, how do we regulate traffic to the places that kids go from all over the school, okay? And when it's like the lunchroom, we've kind of got the, yeah, we need to deal with that. And so how do we deal with when class comes and class goes and so on? But we also really need to think about the ones that are just kind of the Wild West out there of whenever the kid wants to go, they get sent, which is the nurse's office. That's been an ongoing problem even before COVID, because if the nurse wanted to actually be able to like eat lunch or have 5 minutes uninterrupted to go to the bathroom, there'd be a lot of pushback of, no, I have to send the kid because the kid said they need to go. And so a big part of it is helping teachers have exactly the information they need. You know, what I think, and I'd love to get feedback from teachers about it, which is why I'm going to send this survey to everybody. And what I'll be doing is also sending the results from it out to everybody with your name taken off. So you can write anything in there and your thoughts will be shared with everybody without anyone knowing it was you. I mean, on my database, they're still linked up. So if someone wanted to ask you something, I'd then pass that question on to you for you to decide if you want to answer them. So your privacy is protected in sharing. But I do want to hear from teachers about this as well. My perception is that what teachers need to be able to regulate that process, to be able to at times say no to the kid or to say not yet to the kid, whether it's that you have certain times for injuries and different times for potentially infectious things or whatever the system is. You know, if it's, I've got a kid here that we're waiting to send home and no one should come in this office until the kid leaves and I wash down the office, that might be a situation. There's going to be times when you need to be able to say to the teachers, yeah, no, you can't send someone right now. So my perception is what the teachers need is information about how to determine what is an emergency, what needs to be seen right away, and what can wait, and how to deal with the things that are waiting. Supplies to be able to deal with it. And one person at the meeting yesterday had a brilliant idea for it that I will be sharing with the update this weekend. And backup, administrative backup, because what I hear from the teachers is rarely, but I think the kid's really sick. What I hear from the teachers, usually, and again, the really sick is its own problem. What I usually hear from the teachers is, I don't think the kid needs to leave class now either. I think a headache that you've had for 5 minutes is not something you need to go to the nurse for either. But the parents are going to yell at me if I don't send them. And what we need is when the parents call the administration or the nurse and says, why didn't my child says that they wanted to go to the nurse today and they weren't allowed to go. That should not result in the teacher getting yelled at by either the parent or the administration or even scolded. It should be that the administration or the nurse or whoever gets that call says, yes, that was a very good decision the teacher made because this is our protocol. This is what we are doing now. We are preventing infection. And oh, as a side benefit, we're teaching your kid that they do not need to take a Tylenol 5 minutes into a headache. Just in case you want them to learn any of those self-care tips. So yeah, we are working on collecting input from that, and I'll be sending what I get back out, and it might even become a coherent form at some point for people to modify for themselves. Let's see, someone's putting a question over in chat. Let's see, someone talking about changing executive function and ability to learn or do schoolwork as a conversion disorder after a trauma. I mean, a sudden ability to not learn. I would say that's not a conversion disorder, that's PTSD, okay? That is absolutely unsurprising, expected even. If someone has PTSD, has a trauma that they need to be working on, has anxiety that they need to be working on, they've got a major, major neurological, psychological, cognitive task to do. And they unfortunately live in a world that says, yeah, but you got to keep up at school too at the same time. I mean, think about it. If your spouse died and you had to take care of everything now, how would you feel about going to work the very next day and having to do everything at work and everyone saying you still have to do everything? You know, that's kind of, you know, if you've got a trauma, it can take weeks or months. And during that time, it's going to be really, really hard for your brain to be learning because your brain is busy doing other things. Your brain is fried doing other things. It is really no different expecting a kid who's recovering on anxiety or depression or trauma to also be absorbing all the material in school as saying, okay, the kid's having a seizure and I know that their brain is busy having an electrical storm right now, but I'm going to keep teaching and expect the brain to also be absorbing what I'm telling it. No, the brain is kind of busy right now. It's doing something else. And we got to get that when a kid is recovering, and it is a really cruel fact of the universe that they don't get the space to do that, because there is this, you'll fall behind. You'll get behind. I mean, imagine if your first year teaching or your first year as a nurse, you were hit by a bus and you spent 4 months in the hospital. And when you come back, every scrap of work that crossed your desk in your absence is there waiting for you to do it, in addition to everything going forward. And by the way, unless you achieve all that, and even if you do, you will never be at the same level as everyone else who started the same year you did. The rest of your life, everyone will look at you and go, oh, yeah, you're behind, aren't you? That's what kids face. This staying at grade level, I mean, it's there, it's intrinsic, it's unavoidable, but it's also intrinsically cruel, and we need to get that. You know, I've got people who are really questioning meds in young kids. And I'm like, yeah, there's a kid that I'm treating who has trauma to deal with and ADHD, and he's taking some fairly heavy duty meds to try and do that, to try and make the trauma something that he can work on a little bit more actively. Because yeah, it'd be really nice if he could just work on the trauma, but it's going to take a couple years. And unfortunately, it's not like the world says, okay, yeah, do that. You can come back and do first grade curriculum when you're 9. No, the world says, no, you still have to go to school and do everything. So to be able to do that, he needs to also be taking meds to make school and the psychological work accessible. So let's see. Someone's saying that they think they didn't do something very well. It's okay, you'll get better. We all improve with time. I could tell you the stories of things I've done horribly, but not now because it's too many people out there and it's embarrassing. Let's see. We're always so concerned because it looks like a real seizure. Ding you on that word. Hard to believe that it was a pseudo seizure. Any advice? Well, the thing is, you're supposed to treat an epileptic seizure and a pseudo seizure the same. You call 911 and you send them away. You send them out to get treated, worked out, whatever it is. And if a person's having an epileptic seizure, you should have a visual shield around. You know, either they would not want the other kids to see this, or they really should not want the other kids to see this. Either way, having a visual shield up is the right answer. Okay? And if they're having an epileptic seizure or a pseudo seizure, you still want to convey to them that they are safe, but not that they are now suddenly way more interesting and worthy of concern and care, and that you care more about them and you kind of like them more now. You wouldn't want to convey that either. So you treat them the same. So it's really, really not a flaw at all. Someone said, if a child is able to stop seizure-like activity, would you still call 911? I've had kids present with very neurological symptoms in a setting that appeared avoidant and then have symptoms resolve once in my office. And I explained that we are likely to call 911. I always send home and advise letting the doctor know these cases, but very often it never reoccurs and the parent never seeks medical attention. An example would be a kid that says they suddenly can't see or can't feel a limb, but symptoms resolve once calmer and realize the nurse may call 911. Yeah, there are certain things that are so clearly not, I mean, the reason to call 911 is to prevent brain damage. Okay, if you are really rock solid that brain damage ain't gonna happen, you're okay with that. Okay, I mean, for one thing, you call 911 at the beginning of the seizure, and if the seizure's all done, they might not, I mean, some of you who have kids with seizure disorders, they don't go out by ambulance every single time they seize. You know, if you give them the PRN and the seizure resolves with less than X minutes, then they're good to, you know, either go home or even stay in school. So, so yeah, you could have a side effect of calling 911 being a way to tell them that this is serious and they shouldn't be saying things like that, or something like that. That's a really expensive way to teach a kid that lesson, when a real good conversation would be far more effective and better. Okay, so when you see a kid tangibly, palpably modifying the behavior mid-seizure, that's a real good sign that it is pseudo-seizure, or even a behavioral seizure, or behavioral, you know, an actual fake one. There was one student that they called about where the neurologist had very generously given them a diagnosis of epileptic and non-epileptic seizures, and the parents would insist that, oh, absolutely, it's a real seizure, it's an epileptic. We've been looking online, and it looks just like what we see online, more and more every day. It's like, okay, so the kid's getting that input, and that is kind of influencing what's happening. But again, the treatment is the same, whether it's a behavioral or a non-behavioral one. You recognize that input during the seizure is affecting the seizure, and that will help clarify the diagnosis. And so in that case, I told them that one thing they might do is, while they're supervising the seizures, have the nurse go into teachy mode and tell the other adults things of what you would expect to see in an epileptic seizure, and then proceed to lie and make shit up and say, like, it always starts in the dominant arm, we don't know why, or something like that, that is completely not true. And then if that starts showing up in their, you know, real epileptic seizure, then you pretty much got it fit. But what you'd want to be saying to this kid who will have a complaint and then they immediately drop it when they see you mean business, would be to not just say, okay, good, don't lie again, go back to class, but say, okay, when you said that, clearly you weren't saying, I want to go to the hospital. Why don't we figure out what you did want to say and find words to say that, so you don't need to say this other thing? You know, it's same as if you got a kid who says, I'm so sad, I just want to die, I might kill myself. And I've got a developmentally delayed client who will do that sometimes. I turn to her and say, okay, when you say that, are you saying, I might hurt myself and I need to go stay in the hospital for a while? Or are you saying, I want you to stop talking and listen to me right now? She's, oh yeah, that second one. I'm like, okay, then say that second one. Because by saying you feel like you want to kill yourself, you're liable to end up going to the hospital for a while, which is not what you wanted. And so helping them, you know, say, we want to hear what you're trying to tell us. Clearly, you're using a code that is a dysfunctional code. So let's help them learn how to use a more functional code. And the only reason they'd have to use it is if it actually works, because we listen to them. So if we model to them that, yeah, if you can actually use words to say how you feel, I'm going to actually listen to you, rather than, okay, yeah, you were lying, go back to class. Have I ever seen any students on seizure meds that have PNES? It's definitely possible. It's absolutely possible, because, you know, like that girl with the generous, she's got both diagnosis, she was almost certainly put on anti-seizure meds as well. So it's definitely possible. I mean, taking any med that is not technically needed is problematic. One would hope that they would not be getting treated for seizures without having actually had a definitive seizure diagnosis. For those who are wondering what that is, the brain is more likely to have seizures when the brain is irritable. And as you may have noticed in your own brain at home, your brain is really irritable when it's just falling asleep or just waking up. So what they do is they do an EEG to read the brain activity as the kid falls asleep and gets woken up. And falls asleep and gets woken up. The way to get the kid to be falling asleep frequently and waking up, you just do with loud noises, is by making them stay up the night before, because they want to do it during the day. So it's real fun. If you've got a kid who's really high maintenance, you tell the parents, okay, go home and keep them up all night and then bring them in for this test. So it's a sleep deprived EEG. We'd have kids on the units that had to go for sleep deprived EEGs, and it's really fun to have to keep a kid up all night on a unit where you're trying to get all the other kids to go to sleep all night. It's a hoot. But anyway, so hopefully they would not be getting the seizure meds without having actually shown seizure activity on a sleep deprived EEG. And see, someone's asking, do I see kids for private practice? Yeah, my private practice is a little tiny thing tucked in around the corners of all of this. Since it's a small thing, I do not take insurance. So that is another thing that people need to be aware of, is that it can be expensive. For meds, it's not as expensive. I mean, the intake's pricey anywhere. And then the med follow-ups are shorter and cheaper. Therapy is, I don't see why anyone would pay directly for therapy. I mean, no, therapy is wonderful. And if you got therapists you love, it totally makes sense. But it seems to make even more sense to love a therapist that takes your insurance. So it varies. It depends on what's going on. So yes, I do. Let's see, what else are people asking about? Let's see, substance abuse assessments, step-by-step, and documentation, and 911 parent next steps. There was someone asking over there. Let's see. Oh dear, people are sticking stuff over in chat. So let me look at them here because I won't see them later. Okay, let's see. Strategies for school avoidance and school refusal. That is the beyond anxiety, the helping students with anxiety beyond the basics. Also, if there's anyone that I don't do again, pretty much all of my presentations will be available in recording form. No contact hours, but available. Love to see program on substance abuse assessments, step-by-step, and documentation. That is in the substance abuse one. So let's see, quick assessments for students who have symptoms that are not clearly one diagnosis. A child who has never been seen by a mental health provider. They're having difficulty in the school setting. That really feels like the case studies one. Why can't we just do that? Because I want to do that. I hate making up kids is the thing. Which is weird because I love making stuff up all the time, but I feel weird making up kids. And so for me to like teach that one, I'd have to, you know, make up a kid. So conversion disorders are really, really fascinating. They are really cool. And for those of you who bothered to linger, that podcast rocks. The one about the amplified musculoskeletal pain syndrome, because these are almost exclusively teenage girls who their nerves, and it's very much in the nerves, their nerves get so tightly wound that the lightest touch feels like ridiculous, overwhelming pain. So like a light breeze puts them in agony, okay? And they become completely incapacitated. They can't go anywhere. They can't go to school anymore. And they're just like lying there holding very still. And it tends to be progressive and get worse and worse and worse over time. And so, and they tried all kinds of meds and nothing was working. And then there was one program, I think in Chicago, that came up with a behavioral program to try and address this. And it is, the program is again, it's a residential one. And they come there and they do painful things all the time. It's like, okay, you got someone who can't tolerate a light breeze and they have to go swim laps. They have to do stuff on a treadmill and so on. And they are never, ever asked to scale their pain. They're never asked to rank how much pain were they in. Instead, they're asked, was that easy, medium, or hard? Which kind of tells you how much discomfort they were in, but it recasts it, because when you think about it, if I say something is hard, then I feel like if I did it, I accomplished something. I did something hard. If I do something and say it made my pain be an 8, I feel like I should not have had to do that. Why'd you make me do that? I was in pain. You know, that scaling a number very much moves you towards don't do. Scaling a difficulty moves you more towards doing. The other thing they do is the staff are extremely, completely matter of fact about everything. They are, I mean, they're compassionate, but they're not warm and fuzzy. You know, they described at one point the girl was doing the treadmill and was in so much pain that she threw up. And the response from the staff was to remind her that she's supposed to make it to the garbage can next time, because it's not acceptable for her to leave a mess for other people to have to clean up, which just sounds so incredibly cruel. But the thing is, it seems to be working, that the more it becomes not reinforcing higher pain means more sympathy, more care, and more not needing to do difficult things, you break that linkage there and the pain starts to go down. And it goes down on a tangible physical level, because it's not that they're just lying about it, it's that their nerves are hyper responsive. And it's really fascinating of talking about how the cognitive and the physical feed into each other and really connect with each other. And you cannot, people have a really hard time grasping how much power there is in that. For example, pain syndrome used to be a subset of somatoform disorder, where specifically pain is caused or exacerbated by psychological symptoms. And people would look at this as if, oh, well, that means the person is, maybe they're drug seeking because they're lying about their pain. It's like, no, other things will make pain hurt more, which we recognize, we experience it ourselves, you know? And one fascinating, I don't know if it counts as a study because it's more anecdotal, was a doctor who was at one of the wars, I forget which one, whether it was World War II or Korea, but one of the old, we give them morphine kind of wars. And at one point, treating the people, you know, right by the front lines, a MASH unit, whatever, they were running out of morphine. They were like freaking out because they've got all these bullet victims coming in and they don't have enough morphine. And so the doctor just said, well, let's start asking first. Instead of having the automatic, of course, we're giving him morphine. He just got shot in the leg. He needs morphine. They asked. And they were surprised to discover how many guys said, yeah, no, I'm okay. It doesn't hurt that much. And so they managed to get through without so much morphine. And so he thought, hey, maybe we're just overtreating. We don't need to do this all the time. Maybe bullet wounds don't hurt as much. Maybe there's some shock syndrome or something like that. So when he went into private practice, when he came back, it wasn't private practice. He's in an ER in like downtown Chicago. And he started doing the same thing where people would come in. If they came in with a bullet wound, he'd ask before offering pain meds. All of them wanted pain meds. And again, it wasn't that, you know, these were noble soldiers and these were drug-seeking inner city people. He realized that a big part of it is what is going on cognitively in that situation. If you've been shot and you're a soldier in the war, you've been in hell and you're about to go home. It's over. You survived. Yes, you're injured. You're going to get a medal for that, but you're alive. You're not going to die after all. You get to see your family, you get to go home and you'll be a hero, and the horror is over. If you get shot on your street in Chicago, the horror has just begun. You now have this injury. They may now have caught the person who shot you. Maybe they're still going to shoot you. Maybe you live in a place where this happens all the time, and the horror has just begun or gotten worse. And that contributes to how much pain do you feel. And we got to recognize that, especially when we're dealing with like the opioid crisis and how people perceive pain, how much it relates to what their lives are like, you know, and recognizing that if you see an economic divide, which you don't see a huge one, but you might say, oh yeah, well, there's a higher percentage of opioid abuse among people who live in poverty. You got to recognize that it's because their lives hurt more. Just at baseline, they've got a lot more things contributing to pain in their life so that it is unsurprising that they might feel more pain in the case of an injury. Or if we look at like the increase among teens and say, oh yeah, a football player gets an ACL, a torn ACL, and now the orthopedist gave him Percocet and now he's going to be addicted to opiates. How much of that is the introduction of opiates and how much of that is the end of his football career? If that was the center of his identity and now he's never going to play football again, his life hurts a lot more than just his knee. And then they give him opiates. So recognizing how the mind and the body really interact and recognizing the physiology of it. There's last story and then we'll stop, but it's a really cool story. How to amputate a phantom limb. Okay, now phantom limb, you know, you get an amputation and you feel your arm hurting, okay? We understand that this is because the nerve, when it got severed, has proceeded to continue to freak out. It's kind of like if you're talking to someone on the cell phone and the call cuts out. If they were saying, oh, I'm about to go into a tunnel, and then the call cuts out, you're like, oh yeah, they went into a tunnel. If instead they say, oh my God, what's that? And then they scream, and then the call cuts out, you're probably a little bit more nervous about why did that call cut out. Nerves doing the same thing. It was getting information, and then it stopped getting information. The information it was getting was that something very bad was happening to this arm. And so now it continues to think that something very bad is happening to this arm. And so you end up with phantom limb pain. So there was this guy who had at the shoulder amputation, and he had a phantom limb that wasn't just like his arm hurts. It was that he felt his arm curled up tight against his chest with his phantom fingernails digging into his phantom palm until he would be looking for phantom blood. You know, it was excruciatingly painful. And they tried every Neurontin and other, you know, nerve medicine agent to try and tell the nerves to chill out, and nothing was working. And then he went to a psychologist who said, okay. And he patched this eye and put a mirror here and told him to put his existing arm in that position. And so looking in the mirror with the one eye, he would see as if he had two arms like this. You follow how that would work with a vertical mirror like this. And you say, put your arm in that position and then straighten it out. And put your arm in that position and then straighten it out. And do that 20 minutes a day. Within like 3-4 days, phantom limb was gone. Because his brain, having that visual input of seeing the non-existent arm straighten out, convinced the nerves that the non-existent arm was straight and not curled into a tight, painful ball anymore. So, I mean, just how cool is that? I love the somatoform disorders because they've got so many really, and then this freaky thing happened kind of stories to go with them. So it really pisses me off when people call it fake because, you know, aside from that being, you know, not helpful and mean and hurtful to the person, it's not fake. There's lots of really cool stuff out there and it's all real and it's very cool. So, okay. So I'm going to assume that everyone has seen all they need to of the posters and that you've got stuff to do and that you will go have a wonderful weekend.